During lunchtime, the room closed, kids were gone. And for anyone who's actually taught young people, I can tell you that that first day went poorly. It was a hot mess. I had no idea what I was doing. They weren't happy to see me. And I remember putting my head on my desk and I started to cry because I had at that moment gone back to school. I got my teaching credential. I didn't study education and I was an undergrad. And I was like, okay, wait a second here. I just took out a loan to do this.
Laura actually is the managing director of the Stanford University School of Design. She's a visionary, right? Educational leader and designer with over 25 years of experience transforming schools, adult learning programs, and educational systems. Actually, Laura holds a degree from Miami University and a master's degree in policy and management from Harvard Graduate School of Education. She's the co-author of my favorite failure, How Setbacks Can Lead to Learning and Growth. Laura, welcome to the stage.
Awesome. Thank you all. And good morning to everybody. And just one, thank you all. I see some of the folks. Eric, I've met you before. Good to see you. And good to see faces. I've got a very short amount of time with you all. And I just want to express some gratitude to everybody here on the call this morning. Just one, showing up on a Zoom, right? That's a thing. And being present and trying to think about what do we do now? I've spent my life thinking about transitions a lot. And how do we think about creativity? And so I'm going to jump into it. I have a very, very, very short talk, but it's actually really a personal talk, to be really clear. It's something about how we think about creativity. This is about this conference, as I've learned from my friends here. And Jonathan, thank you for the warm introduction. Is how do we think about our creativity career? And I want us to think a little bit differently about creativity. I spend my life in creativity world, and often in a very, very short story before we get into it, I myself never thought of myself as a creative. As a young person, I was one of those people that thought differently, I guess. I had a sewing class, I remember middle school, and they asked me to sew balloons, and they wanted me to sew them in circles. And I was like, why can't they be squares? Why can't they be something different? Why do I have to follow the exact pattern that you're giving me? And at the time, I just thought I was a disruptive, kind of silly student. And in reality, what I realized as I got older is actually I was practicing creative thinking, the practicing of what if. And so I'm just going to get into it. I'm going to see how this, I haven't been on the Zoom in a while doing a keynote. So we're going to just do the thing and we'll see how it goes. And then I'll come back you all, I think for the wrap up, I believe right at 11:30, right, to do a little bit of roundtable and conversation. So I know we have a short amount of time, so let's get into it. All right. Can you see this? Give me a thumbs up. Yep. Okay, great. All right. I'm going to just see how this goes. Okay. So hi, y'all. Welcome. For those of you who don't know, the D School, our vision is really to envision a world where abundance of human imagination, different than creativity, side note there, innovation and human ingenuity, right, builds a thriving society and a flourishing planet. And the things that we are obsessed. Yes, ma'am.
There's a pop-up on your screen.
Oh, continue to share. Correct. Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Thanks. I wasn't sure if that was just me or you. Thank you. I typically don't do in PowerPoint, but for some reason this ended up in PowerPoint. So the question that we're always wrestling with, and the thing that we think about for our students is this one, is what are the design jobs of tomorrow, right? What are the creative careers for tomorrow? And for me, they look a lot like this. Maybe they're a conservation science designer, an education data shepherd, a democracy designer, a near Earth or orbit designer, a bioethicist. These jobs require creativity across content, across domains, across fields. across people, across challenges that require people to think across in divergent ways. And so I believe like design has a fundamental role in shaping the future. And so as Jonathan kind of like summed up very briefly, like why this matters right now, he just queued us up, is that we're living in this, right? I'm sure some of you have seen this. It's a famous quote by Stuart Brandt. He's a great futurist. If you haven't played with his work, I encourage you to do so. But this present moment, right, used to be the unimaginable future. For those sitting you with your iPhone, your phones right around you, that came out in 2008. We often overpredict the change in the short term and underpredict the change in the long term. You think about the world in 2008, you think about the world in 2018, when all of a sudden we had all these different crazy apps happening, right? A very different world. In design, we call these our peak squig moments, right? Moments where it's the part of the design process where everything you thought, right, is challenged. There is both maximum possibility and maximum ambiguity. They coexist. This is where design and I think creativity can play a role. And for those of you that are like in your like, what am I going to do with my life question? It might look like this. This is what the peak squig looks like in design, right? And it might feel like this. Wow, yikes. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? What does this look like, right? It feels like this sometimes. And so I think that like maximum possibility and boundless ambiguity requires us to embrace divergent thinking. You know, creativity is thinking about lots of ways of being, not just convergent thinking, right? Which is a synthesis of multiple things, but we call divergent thinking. And divergent thinking, right, is the ability to explore possible solutions to a problem rather than focusing on one single answer. I would encourage you to think that way about your careers, right? There's not just one career, there are many. And so when you think about divergent thinking as a critical piece of creativity, you might get images like this, right? Some of you have probably been in design sprints. One of the famous design sprints is like, this is a pencil, and you must come up with like 12 ideas for a pencil. And everybody's like, yeah, that's fun. Let's find all these ideas. And you'll notice in here, people are smiling and they're having these great design sprints and they're having a good time. But when you actually start practicing divergent thinking as a creative outside of these sprints, you might be in a meeting later, like 2 weeks later, and you're talking about budgets. You're talking about policies. You're talking about like things that are probably not the creative field. And you, as a creative or divergent thinker, might get this response from people because you're still thinking in divergent ways and everyone doesn't want to have the maximum ideas. They might want to have this. So it feels like this. You know, being a creative by different things sometimes feels like this. And so I wanted to share, you know, basically 1 or 2 stories if I have time for me, creative lessons I've learned the hard way. Or being a divergent thinker, confessions as an alternative title, confessions from a divergent design leader. And I want to share it in a framework, and I would encourage you to do this with yourself. There's a QR code that you can, grab if you want. I can send it all as an email as well. This is a journey map that we use in design. I use it with my students. I'm sure Eric is fully aware of done this before. And we ask people to track their a learning moment, their design process, and we track it in 2 ways. One is their learning. And so on the right side, I'm not sure how this works on your screen, but my right side of my screen is kind of like the learning scale. When I was really learning something new that really pushed my thinking about something. And on the right side is how I felt about it. And so what I wanted to share with you, and I'm sorry, I can't see the chat. So if anyone has things, please, I'll look at that in a second. This is my journey map as my career. And so I made this for you all as a way for me to track when in my career, as a creative, as a divergent thinker, was I really learning? And what did I feel? And so I wanted to share kind of 2 moments, because I think as you're practicing being a creative in any field, often we think in the role, but in actually being a creative is about the moments. It's about practicing creativity, divergent thinking in the moments of your career, in the moments of your role. That is how we shape the world. Yes, you should have a creative role. If you want one, you can one, but we can all be creative in the roles that we have. And so I'll share just like two little stories. One is my first year teaching. I was a teacher in San Diego on the border of San Diego and Mexico, 3,600 kids. I was their fourth teacher of the year, and they had subs all the way up into me. And I can tell you right now, they were not happy to see me because I rolled in and they're like, she's gone in like 2 months. They're not going to want me here. And they'd already started the year. And my first day, I had all these great ideas. I was like, we're going to do this. I'm going to do this. I've got this. I think I had a paperclip activity. I know I did. And I was ready to go with them. And about halfway through the day, during lunchtime, the room closed, kids were gone. And for anyone who's actually taught young people, I can tell you that that first day went poorly. It was a hot mess. I had no idea what I was doing. They weren't happy to see me. And I remember putting my head on my desk and I started to cry because I had at that moment gone back to school. I got my teaching credential. I didn't study education and I was an undergrad. And I was like, okay, wait a second here. I just like took out a loan to like do this, and now I'm in debt and I got to be in this room for the next 20 years. I don't know. I think I made a wrong decision in this moment. I was trained. I had all these ideas. And this is an actual true story. And so like, I'm not making this up. And then that moment, I literally heard a knock on my door. And there was a young girl, her name is Catherine, and she was carrying a Trapper Keeper. I am dating myself, y'all. If anyone has seen a Trapper Keeper, they're still cool. They're retro, they're vintage. You should get one. They have Velcro. They're fun to open. But she had a horse Trapper Keeper. And she came in and she asked, can I have lunch with you? And in that moment, I learned something really interesting. Is that everything that I thought I knew about teaching and learning was wrong. The job was not to help them teach grammar and get them all the things. It was to connect to the students, to listen to the people that are not heard. All she wanted in that moment was to be seen. As a creative, our job, the number one thing that you can do as a practicing divergent is who is not being seen. Who is not being heard? How do we seek out the voices that aren't in the room but should be? That is a practice for becoming a divergent thinker when you're in a role, in a moment. That is the pause, that's the flow, that's the way to think differently. All right, last story, second one. And I know folks who love design, we talk about the pain point. Like, what's wrong with this problem? What's wrong in this moment? And one of the things that we think about, and I love that, and it's usually shaped like this idea of traditional problem solving is usually framed in this way about what's wrong. But as a divergent or creative thinker, we can also design for the peak point. What's working? How do we actually understand who is actually winning? And so when I started at the D school, I was trained in the pain points. And then we started on a project where we started to capture what we call the positive deviants, who in a moment, and this could apply to a startup, this could apply to scaling, this could apply to healthcare, policy, you name it, any field. How do we uncover who is winning in the similar conditions and making an impact? How do we scale that? When we uncovered this, we flip scale, not trying to get everybody to do the thing that we want them to do, but uncovering what we call the bright spots, the best practices, and understanding the behaviors, mindsets, and attitudes to replicate those. That is how we do equitable scale. That is how we do co-design of making things possible for more people, not just telling them what to do. We all know, we've all been there. Nobody wants to be told what to do. But if we can help people uncover, and so from that, we actually built what we call as a positive deviance toolkit, QR codes right there. And from that, this idea as a creative is how do we chase the positive deviants. And secret here is that positive deviants don't know that they are. They're usually doing something counter-cultural, something that's different than the norm. They might just assume that's the way they do it, but it's something that's making a difference and they may not know. It could be as simple as a handshake when people walk in the room, but it shifts the culture. A positive deviant looks, or a creative thinker looks for the positive deviant who's winning. And so you'll see I probably have a few other lessons. I don't have time to share them all, but I threw this up there for y'all as some other things. You know, this idea of how do we make it matter to people? How do we like let go and make space for emergence? You know, creativity lies in what we call the riff, letting people play. And then lastly, I think the biggest thing for me is like question the question. 9 times out of 10, when you're solving a problem, the question might be wrong. And so I want to encourage you as we close up to remind yourself is that all of you are on this call. You're probably a creative in your mind, or you're a divergent thinker like me. And as you go into the design session, yes, you're going to ideate. Yes, you're going to do some new stuff. But what I want you to think about is what lessons do you actually need to remember? Not be taught, right? What lessons have you had in your life where you have sparked that own divergent thinking, that parallel possibilities? That is actually how we shape our next careers. The future is like, we all have this capacity. So how do we get better at remembering when we've done that ourselves and using our internal authentic insights and shaping that? And I think that is, if I'm right, if the slide is correct, I think that's it. Okay.